Welcome to the Fourth Branch program. Glad you can make it. I am MD. This program is dedicated exclusively for those with common sense, a spirit of patriotism, and a determination for a more perfect union. Stay tuned as we begin the discussion of a very important, interesting, and enlightening topic. Hope to hear from you soon. Happy listening. John F. Kennedy said that the ignorance of one voter in a democracy impairs the security of us all. Hello everyone, I am MD and this is the Fourth Branch program. First, a warning. This program is not suitable for all audiences. I repeat, the content of this program is not for everyone. To find out if it's suitable to you, please answer the following two questions. Would you entrust your teenage daughter to a known rapist? Question number two. Would you have a known pedophile cared for your toddler? Once again, question number one. Would you entrust your teenage daughter to a known rapist? And question number two, would you have a known pedophile cared for your toddler? If you had difficulty answering either questions, this program is not for you. If you answer yes to either or to both questions, this program is definitely not for you. But if your answers to both questions are absolutely not, this program is catered to you and you should stick around. It is enlightening, informative, educational, and quite interesting. We'll be right back. In 1996, a small network by the name of Fox News was launched with just 17 million viewers. Today, with over 100 million people watching regularly, Fox has become the greatest threat to our democracy, constantly bombarding the airwaves with false information, distortion of facts, and outright lies, presenting to its audience as news. Fox has created an army of blissful ignorance. According to a recent survey, 82% of Fox viewers are ignorant of facts and the truth. To keep millions of people in ignorance not only prevents democracy from flourishing, but it also clears the path to authoritarianism, to dictatorship. Martin Luther King Jr. said, "Nothing in all the world is more dangerous than sincere ignorance and conscientious stupidity." Let me finish by saying that democracy cannot survive in an environment where truth and facts do not matter. At Fox, truth and facts do not matter. Indeed, democracy in America is in jeopardy. It is a crisis the country can no longer ignore. It is with great sadness that I announce that Brett Kavanaugh has been confirmed as the next Supreme Court Justice. You heard right. It is with great sadness that Brett Kavanaugh has been confirmed as the next Supreme Court Justice. Now, I know at this point there are two very distinct groups who may be surprised by the news. Those who are fighting tooth and nail to prevent it from happening, and those who are still holding their breath and hoping that that becomes true. And the reason is very simple. Just this morning at 10:30, there was what is known in the Senate as a procedural vote, simply meaning that there was a majority of the members of the Senate, at least the Judiciary Committee, who agreed to move the process for the confirmation of Brett Kavanaugh forward. And that's all that means. In other words, there is hope because there is only one step left for confirmation or rejection of Brett Kavanaugh as the next Supreme Court Justice. Now, how did I come to the conclusion that he is going to be the next justice? Very simple. Number one, the Republicans are in the majority. the Democrats are not. Of course, the Democrats are hoping that a few senators, Jeff Flake, Susan Collins, Murkowski, would vote no in order to prevent Brett Kavanaugh from being placed on the Supreme Court. The likelihood of any of that happen is pretty low. Why? Since the very beginning of the process, it was very obvious that Republicans did not have any interest whatsoever in figuring out, or at least finding out, whether Kavanaugh is fit for the Supreme Court. We're not talking about his credentials. He has plenty. In fact, during the hearing, he laid it out for everybody to know that he has a long list of credentials which make him very qualified for the Supreme Court justice, and he's not wrong. And on top of that, the President of the United States has been pushing everyone in the Senate to make certain that Brett Kavanaugh is seated on the Supreme Court. Now, if we stick to the report and not give in to rumors, if you remember when Kennedy announced his retirement, there were rumors that he was pushed out by the President of the United States in order for him to have the opportunity to place someone on the Supreme Court which would take his side. He is under investigation by the special counsel, and Kennedy most likely would not go and protect Donald Trump, but Brett Kavanaugh, at least that's what the President of the United States believes, would. But unfortunately, the Republican legislature, especially those who are members of the Judiciary Committee, seems to be going along without any afterthought to make certain that Brett Kavanaugh is seated on the Supreme Court. When 3 weeks ago, an accusation by Christine Blasey Ford became public, Republican close rank and swear to make certain that the process advanced so that Brett Kavanaugh could be voted, could be confirmed to the Supreme Court. In fact, ironically, as the situation was unfolding, the Republican chairman of the Judiciary Committee, Chuck Grassley, senior member like Orrin Hatch, all came out and gave statement that clearly dictate they had no interest whatsoever in finding out whether that accusation was correct or not. As far as they were concerned, the process had to move forward irrespective of the circumstance. And sure they did. They tried everything humanly possible to make sure that they shielded Brett Kavanaugh, and Brett himself wasn't helpful to the process either. Now, at the last moment, last Thursday, when a hearing was held to listen to Christine Blasey Ford, who is the individual who accused Brett Kavanaugh of having sexually assaulted her when she was 15 years old and Brett was 17, and they were both in high school. After hearing Christine and hearing Brett, Chuck Grassley, chairman of the Judiciary Committee, set the following day for the vote to confirm Brett Kavanaugh. Anybody with a sound mind could easily tell that the Christine Blasey Ford hearing was just for show. It bears no end of value whatsoever, because by all analysis, anyone would say that after hearing an individual who accused the nominee of having sexually assaulted her, you would think that the chairman of the Judiciary Committee would have the decency, if not the morality, to take a few days to analyze this statement, to analyze the hearing, to confer with others, but rather already before the hearing even took place, already set the following day for a vote. You don't have to be a genius to figure that the hearing was just for show. But it so happened that on Friday, as said by Chuck Grassley, the committee gathered to vote for Brett Kavanaugh. But something happened, something unexpected happened. Jeff Flake, on his way either to grab a bite or whatever the situation was met by a constituent who expressed her concern about his vote to move the process forward. When he got back to the meeting, he proposed a compromise, which is to have the FBI investigate the matter before a vote. After a few back and forth between the seniors in the committee, they finally agreed to the process. But again, it was just for show, because according to the report, the White House agreed to FBI investigation, but by limiting the number of people FBI could talk to, namely 4 people. And they had 1 week to complete that investigation. After much pressure, the White House made a public statement that FBI could interview anyone they deemed necessary, but they still had 1 week to complete the investigation. It was still not enough, but better than what the Democrat had, except for one small problem. FBI hand was handcuffed because by Tuesday, FBI had already completed its investigation. Needless to say, that was a shocking revelation for everybody who was looking at the particular predicament, because not only there were so many individuals that were provided or who wanted to come out and provide their collaboration of testimonies already given either by Christine Blasey Ford or the second accuser Deborah Ramirez or the third accuser. FBI ignored all of them. And it is very safe to conclude it wasn't a move by FBI, rather an order that came from the White House. And as predicted, by Wednesday morning, a report was dropped at the White House for the Republican to review so that they can vote on Brett Kavanaugh confirmation. Yesterday, Thursday, one by one, the Republican paraded into the White House in a room, a secret room, so called, so that they could review the document and make a decision, which is at this point ongoing as we are talking. Everybody understands that the FBI investigation was also another step taken by the Republican just to appease those who asked for it, but knowing it would bear no weight on the final outcome. As predicted, one by one, they went into the White House, they looked at the document, And as they came out, all Republicans, especially the senior ones, Chuck Grassley, Orrin Hatch and company, they came out and claimed that it was an investigation to their satisfaction. It is pointless to say that all the Democrats came out and expressed anger, frustration at the skimpy report provided by the FBI. The two main actors, the two main parties, Christine Blasey Ford and Brett Kavanaugh, neither one was interviewed by FBI, which is odd because they are the most concerned party. And on top of that, most of the people who try to reach FBI to provide their take, whether on behalf of Christine or on behalf of Brett Kavanaugh, they were all ignored by FBI without having to look beyond those information. It is safe to say this was just an investigation for sure. Regardless, the person that Brett Kavanaugh is to replace is the gentleman who bears the title retired. Kennedy, who announced his retirement a few months ago, will vacate the bench, the Supreme Court, in November. And of course, they need to put someone there to replace him. And Brett Kavanaugh is that individual. Now, before the Christine Blasey Ford accusation came public, almost everybody, be it a former Supreme Court justice, being law professors and so on, were behind supporting Brett Kavanaugh. He is, after all, a very experienced judge. He has been on the Court of Appeal in the District of Columbia for quite some time now. And on top of that, he had many other credentials who makes him qualified to sit on the Supreme Court. However, the hearing last Thursday had a lot of individuals changing their minds. And by a lot of individuals, we mean a lot of individuals. First, his colleagues at Yale, a number of them have withdrawn their support for Brett Kavanaugh. There are at least 600 law professors across the nation who have withdrawn their support for Brett Kavanaugh. And to top it all off, there is this gentleman, it's John Paul Stevens. He is a former Supreme Court justice. He is a Republican. And he too had supported Brett Kavanaugh for the Supreme Court justice. However, after the hearing, he not only had removed his support for Brett Kavanaugh, but he is out and publicly stating that Brett Kavanaugh should not be placed on the Supreme Court. This is not something light. This is not something to discard. This is not something to shrug, because those individuals, the 600 plus law professors, a former Supreme Court justice, and many, many others who have withdrawn their support from Brett Kavanaugh, they did not do that out of partisanship. In fact, most of those people are Republicans. Most of those people fall under the label of conservative. So it's not the damn Democrats, it's not those damn liberals who were asking those people to withdraw their support. But after looking and watching and hearing Brett Kavanaugh, they too came away with something that simply spelled bad for the Supreme Court. The Supreme Court is the highest court in the nation. They have the last word on everything. In other words, individuals placed on the Supreme Court are individuals who are usually of integrity, individuals whose words we can trust, whose character is beyond reproach. Something we cannot say about Brett Kavanaugh. At the hearing, Brett Kavanaugh conveyed, and he started his opening statement in a certain way to make sure that everybody who was there know that he did not borrow those words from anybody. He did not ask anybody to write the speech for him. He said that what you are about to hear, I wrote those things myself. So he made certain that you know he didn't borrow a word from someone. He didn't ask the White House to write those things for him. He wrote them himself. And that was his condemnation as well. Because Brett Kavanaugh comes across as vindictive. He came across as someone who is very biased. But on top of that, Brett Kavanaugh is unreliable, untrustworthy. He had lied many times. And a number of his colleagues, both in high school and in college, have said so publicly, and some have testified to that effect. Now let's pause for just a second and ask the question, why would the Republicans decide at all costs to put someone on the Supreme Court who would undermine the integrity of an institution that not only we in the United States have come to respect, but across the world have tried to emulate? Why would the Republicans want to undermine that institution? That's the big question. Now listen to what Mitch McConnell. So it's not just a small group of people. It's the Republican Party as a whole, which seems to be on the path of destroying every single institution which protect the country, which protect our democracy, and which makes the United States of America an attractive place for people to be. The question is, why? Now, it is understood that people who do not have that much knowledge, people who may not see the big picture, individual constituents, we usually have one pinning against the other. But when you have legislators, people who have the knowledge, the understanding of how the country works, why would they work aggressively to undermine the United States of America? It is already bad enough that we have a president who had most likely collaborated with a foreign entity. We have a president who may end up being subpoenaed by a special counsel because he is suspected of cooperating with a foreign entity. And now we have members in the legislative branch who are working in sync with the executive branch to undermine the United States of America. The question is, why? Why? Why would they not want to protect the Constitution of the United States? They too, just as the President of the United States took an oath to uphold the Constitution, the legislators in Washington, they all have taken that oath to protect and defend the Constitution of the United States. Why would they work so hard to undermine the Constitution? Listen to what Mitch McConnell, he is the leader of the Senate. So we're not talking about just a few people. We're not just talking about ranking members. We're talking about Chuck Grassley. We're talking about Orrin Hatch. We're talking about Paul Ryan. We're talking about individuals like Lindsey Graham, Trey Gowdy, people who have been in the Senate in Washington for long, who understand how the country works, people who have studied law, people who know that the Supreme Court, the highest court in the land, protect the country, protect our institution, protects our democracy. Why in the world do they work so hard to undermine that? Now listen to Mitch McConnell. Way before the hearing, the Christine Blasey Ford hearing last Thursday happened, way before a vote was made, Mitch McConnell went to his audience and said, don't worry about all these noises you're hearing. They just all noise. There's bumps that we will go through, because I promise you, Brett Kavanaugh will be placed on the Supreme Court, for which Mitch McConnell received a standing ovation. It is without any doubt that Republicans had made up their mind that it doesn't matter the lack of character that Brett Kavanaugh has. I oppose the confirmation of Brett Kavanaugh not because of the Christine Blasey Ford accusation, which matter as well, which is an important matter, but because Brett Kavanaugh has proven beyond a reasonable doubt that he is not fit for the Supreme Court. And to place Brett Kavanaugh on the Supreme Court will be a very dark moment in the history of the United States. Unfortunately, Donald Trump is not the only problem the country has. Brett Kavanaugh is not the only problem the country has. The whole Republican Party seems gung-ho destroying the Republic. And they're doing that with impunity. Listen to Mitch McConnell saying to his audience how he's going to move forward no matter what.
And you're all following the current Supreme Court fight. And you will watch it unfold in the course of the next week. President Trump has nominated a stunningly successful individual. You've watched the fight, you've watched the tactics, but here's what I want to tell you. In the very near future, Judge Kavanaugh will be on the United States Supreme Court.
When Mitch McConnell made that statement, the hearing did not happen yet. The Christine Blasey Ford hearing had not occurred yet. Now think of it for just a second. Think of it for just a second. An individual, a woman, came forward and accused the nominee for the Supreme Court justice of having sexually assaulted her. Hearing has not happened yet. Investigation has not happened yet. And Mitch McConnell, the leader in the Senate, standing in front of an audience and said unequivocally, in the near future, Brett Kavanaugh will sit on the Supreme Court. Now, in case you're not following me, translation, it doesn't matter whether Christine Blasey Ford happened to be right. it doesn't matter what investigation would reveal. As far as Republicans are concerned, Brett Kavanaugh will be on the Supreme Court. Now, if you are a Republican and that's your wish, you may feel elated that's the case. But if you are a sound-minded American, if you are a patriot, that should scare the hell out of you. And the reason is because the legislative branch and the executive branch are political branches of our government. The Supreme Court is supposed to be completely detached from any political scenarios. We rely on the Supreme Court to arbitrate matters without any political interference. Now, if you have no problem hearing that from Mitch McConnell, consider this. You also are part of the problem. Don't consider yourself as Republican or conservative. Consider yourself as part of the problem the country is facing. Because if you cannot come to the conclusion that there is something wrong with the picture of your leader, Mitch McConnell, standing in front of an audience, national TV, and said, before even hearing the first word from someone accusing the nominee of sexual assault, that nominee will be put on the Supreme Court in the near future, then you are also part of the problem. So don't blame the country for the problem, because you also, Republicans, are part of the problem. I'll be right back.
I'm telling you, Michael Jordan himself was right here in my McDonald's. I fixed him the very first McJordan special.
Right, Bill.
I did. I took a quarter pound of pure beef, smoked bacon, cheese, and some of my favorite barbecue sauce, and I named it the McJordan Special.
Bill, the sandwich, definitely great.
Yeah, but you got the cooling with that story.
But it's true.
How you doing, Bill?
Hi, Michael. Michael.
The McJordan Special for a limited time.
The United States of America is in a serious crisis. The biggest problem, the crisis that the country is going through now, is to have a network that's called itself news, but that says nothing about news. That's only telling lies, create controversies, and at the same time, educating millions of people to stay or become ignorant. There is nothing that is said by Sean Hannity, there is nothing that is said at Fox that is true. So when I say the country is in a crisis, this is not an exaggeration. Donald Trump is wrong to call the media the enemy of the country. Adolf Hitler did exactly the same thing in 1933. Journalists are not in the business of fairness. Our business, our only business, is to be objective. It is our duty to hold Trump and every administration accountable. Today, it is urgent, it is necessary, it is critical. Our very freedom depends on it.
Wayfair, you
you've got just what I need. Everything from my home, you got it for me. I never see selection quite like this. Every color and size in my mind. They got every single thing on my list. And with 70% off, who knows what I'll find. Wayfair, you've got just what I need. Everything from my home, you got it for me. Wayfair, and the shipping was free. Now my home's the home I want.
From all of us at Wayfair, find what you need today.
We are not going to turn over the conservative movement to a con artist who is telling people one thing but has spent 40 years sticking it to working Americans and now claims to be their champion. We are not going to turn over the conservative movement to a con artist who is telling people one thing but has spent 40 years sticking it to working Americans and now claims to be their champion.
What if hip-hop never existed? Do you think there'd be as many heads screaming out, stop snitching? What if Adam and Eve ain't eat the fruit? You think we'd be able to see the truth?
It is time sound-minded individuals, decent and morally bounded Americans take over the operation and the functioning of our government. For far too long, we have entrusted the legislators in Washington and in our respective states to attend to the interests of the country, but they have violated our trust. They have instead attended to their own self-interest and in the process destroyed the very institution which have guaranteed a system of justice and protected our democracy. The Brett Kavanaugh confirmation hearing has brought to bear the lack of patriotism, the lack of interest in the well-being of the country. Republicans went out of their ways to make excuses for an individual who have clearly shown his true character, an untrustworthy individual with very little interest in the rule of law. When Christine Blasey Ford came forward accusing Brett Kavanaugh of having sexually assaulted her a few decades prior, in full display for the world to see was the Republican Party as a whole, which proves beyond reasonable doubt its leaders have lost touch with reality. Its leaders are no longer fit to hold the offices for which they were elected. Leaders in the Judiciary Committee, especially the elders Orrin Hatch, Chuck Grassley, Lindsey Graham, were quick to dismiss Mrs. Ford's allegation. The leader in the Senate, Mitch McConnell, echoed the sentiment by the chairman of the Judiciary Committee. Donald Trump, the President of the United States, mocked publicly at a rally a victim of sexual assault. To complete the circle, an aspirant to the Supreme Court, Brett Kavanaugh, unleashed into a tirade of political jabs at the Democrats, lied under oath, and implied there is a price for the Democrat to pay if he's elected to the Supreme Court. What goes around comes around, he said. Mr. Kavanaugh is vindictive, untrustworthy, and unfit for any judicial post, let alone the Supreme Court. More than 600 law professors, Democrat and Republican alike, signed a petition against the appointment of Brett Kavanaugh into the Supreme Court. And for the first time in the history of the United States, a retired former Supreme Court Justice, John Paul Stevens, on record against the nomination of Brett Kavanaugh after his tirade against the Democrat. Former Supreme Court Justice Stevens said they suggest, meaning the Brett's comments suggest, he has demonstrated a potential for bias involving enough potential litigants before the court that he would not be able to perform his full responsibilities. Justice Stevens initially supported the nomination of Brett Kavanaugh to the Supreme Court, but he considered him too biased to sit on the Supreme Court. Despite the outcry against such individual, Republican Party seems to be in lockstep with the White House and want Brett Kavanaugh on the Supreme Court at all costs. We, the people, are somewhat responsible for the predicament. The members of the Republican Party making those decisions have been in Washington for several decades. A few are the same individual who placed Clarence Thomas in the Supreme Court despite allegation of sexual harassment. We, the people, have been too disengaged in political discussion, in political debate. We, the people, have been tricked by the legislators who have mastered the art of pinning one group against the other, one party against the other. The difference between us, human beings, and the other animal species is the ability to draw a conclusion. As it stands today, the Republican Party has worked very aggressively in the opposite direction of what the constituent, the American constituent wants. And this is not speculation. On February 2017, just 1 month after Mr. Trump assumed the presidency, the Republican Party passed a $1.5 trillion tax cut, a move that was opposed by 60% of the American constituent. Later in that year, the Republican Party again tried to kill Obamacare, which covers more than 20 million people who would not have had health coverage had it not been for Obamacare. Yes, the Republican Party have been working against the American constituent. The question is, why are they still in Washington? Election after election, they are elected to go back to Washington. We, the people, bear part of the blame, bear part of the responsibility, because the country is going through a situation. It is a crisis. It is a serious crisis, because at this point, we are currently looking at the possibility of having on the Supreme Court an individual of very low character, an untrustworthy individual, a vindictive individual, a situation which will undoubtedly undermine the last hope for the American people. It is time, it is beyond time that we, the people, take over the operation and the functioning of our government. Failure to do so will leave a nation, not us, not our children, not our grandchildren, would want to live in. And needless to point out, people from other countries would just shun the United States altogether, because it will be just another country. I'll be right back. In 1996, a small network by the name of Fox News was launched with just 17 million viewers. Today, with over 100 million people watching regularly, Fox has become the greatest threat to our democracy. Constantly bombarding the airwaves with false information, distortion of facts, and outright lies, presenting to its audience as news, Fox has created an army of blissful ignorance. According to a recent survey, 82% of Fox viewers are ignorant of facts and the truth. To keep millions of people in ignorance not only prevents democracy from flourishing, but it also clears the path to authoritarianism, to dictatorship. Martin Luther King Jr. said, "Nothing in all the world is more dangerous than sincere ignorance and conscientious stupidity." Let me finish by saying that democracy cannot survive in an environment where truth and facts do not matter. At Fox, truth and facts do not matter. Indeed, democracy in America is in jeopardy. It is a crisis the country can no longer ignore. Whether you are a Democrat or a Republican, I urge you today, for the sake of your kids, for the sake of your grandkids, for the sake of future generation, for the sake of our country, I urge you to call your representative and ask to vote no on Kavanaugh. You would do it for your country. Political party will come and go, but the future of our country must be preserved. The Supreme Court is the last institution which is left, not untainted, but we still have trust in the system, in that body of our government. All other institutions have been tainted in one way or another. Brett Kavanaugh has proven beyond reasonable doubt he does not fit for the Supreme Court. Don't let political affiliation dictate what you stand for or how you feel about the whole thing. There is no win in placing Brett Kavanaugh on the Supreme Court. Yes, it could be instant gratification, but the country will lose. Your children, your grandchildren, your great-grandchildren, our country will lose because the Supreme Court will be forever tainted and the integrity of the court will be forever in question. And this is not a predicament we want to put the country in. Thank you for your time. I hope to see you again. The Fourth Branch Podcast is brought to you in collaboration with the People Branch publication, which can be found on the People Branch website, located at peoplebranch.org. That's peoplebranch.org. That's peoplebranch.org website, in which you will find a number of very interesting articles. My name is Mike Duchesne, MD for short. I hope you have a great afternoon or a great evening, whichever it happens to be. Hopefully you can join me again next time for another interesting episode of this podcast. That was the fourth branch, live from New York. Good day.